Hello anchor fans, it's Steve with SV Panope. I'm back out on the water with my GoPro camera and I have gained access to another anchor for testing. This is a 13-pound galvanized steel Mantus anchor. I'm using the smaller test boat that weighs 2,000 or 3,000 pounds. This is a mixed rode with 12 feet of 5/16 chain and the balance is 9/16 nylon 3-strand. Okay, that was the initial set at 3.5 to 1 scope, and that dug in immediately and stopped the boat. Now here's my reset. I've stopped the motion so you can look at that chain. Notice that the chain is well up off from the seabed and that the anchor is having trouble setting. Now the anchor's finally got a good bite and it's stopped the boat. I don't know that it's still kind of creeping ahead there, but that's a pretty good reset. Here's a second reset. Notice that I'm not very vigorous. I'm going a little slower right now, so this may make a few of you folks happy who don't like to see my admittedly rather enthusiastic 3.5 knot reversals. I get to that higher speed later, but for now these first couple I went slower. And the anchor didn't do any backflips or anything there, it just pivoted, and that's probably a little bit more normal, what you'd see just with general wind shifts. And that's pretty nice the way we see the anchor just pivoting there and doesn't move far. It's reset. That's textbook performance. Third reset is a little bit more violent. Anchor does get removed from the seabed. It's trying to reset. The toe of the anchor is digging in, and okay, there, it finally hooked up, stopped the boat. But I keep pulling. It's not the greatest performance. I'd like to see this anchor digging in farther. More of the same. The anchor's lurching, pulling, but just not able to engage. And I think the situation is getting worse at this point. I think fouling is becoming an issue, and we'll get into that more. It certainly was doing far better on the initial set. I don't know how much pull we're seeing here. The engine is just above idle, maybe 1,500 RPM on an engine that revs up to 5,000 or 6,000 RPM. It is a 90 horsepower Honda outboard motor, just a standard high-speed propeller. Okay, that reset was great. That seemed to dig in very, very well. Anchor's still creeping along though, but no violent motion. Here's the sixth reset, and at this point I'm inclined to start thinking that this anchor and rode combination is just not working at 3.5 to 1 scope, and later here I'll increase the scope. And I'm not so sure if it's just the fact that we're not using all chain, or if perhaps smaller anchors, well, I don't know how else to say it, but I don't think they work as well. And we'll spend the rest of this video kind of studying that. And it's also true that none of the other small anchors that I've tested have really shined. There's just been a lot of this, frankly, a lot of anchors dragging along. So here the anchor does eventually engage, but then I add a little bit more power, and notice that it seems to be carrying a blob of seabed with it. It's sure looking like that this anchor is fouling. So by this time it's the 9th reset, and I'm convinced that there's a problem, so I didn't bother doing the 10th one. We'll raise this anchor up and see if there's anything obvious wrong with it, or maybe it picked up a piece of junk that we can't see. No real debris other than a pretty significant blob of mud. But I'm willing to accept that, maybe this anchor and rode combination just won't work at 3.5 to 1 scope, so 5 to 1 is usable in my waters. You often can't use much more, and for me personally, I'm not going to accept any anchor that can't function at 5 to 1 scope. If it needs 6 or 7, that's just not usable. We've got too deep of anchorages. Anchorages are too small. So that's my personal requirement, is an anchor has to work at 5 to 1, and if it doesn't, I won't have it on the boat. So the initial set was perfect. Here's the first reset. Went by nice and fast. Maybe a little too fast. I was getting a little vigorous. Our anchor's actually kind of leaping up off from the bottom. But once it comes back down, that was great. That just connected perfectly. Second reset, mostly pivoted. It did dislodge and then immediately reset. So right away we can see that the better scope is helping. Third reset. That's pretty cool. I mean, that's completely unrealistic for anchoring, but that anchor was not just disengaged from the seabed, it was flying through the water. And I apologize, I was going too fast. I was going more than 3.5 knots. I just was trying to save time up on the surface. But hey, the anchor did great. Once it did touch the bottom, it reset right away. Anchor is hooking up good and stopping the boat, but we're not seeing it really quit moving. If I've got any power at all, it does sort of keep inching along. Sixth reset. Getting a little bit cloudy. That was a very abrupt engagement with the seabed. Seventh reset. Looks like we've partially fouled our camera tethers. We can't see the anchor anymore, but get a great look at the seabed. You can see just exactly how the anchor stops moving with the engine cutting its power. And now we've got a completely fouled camera. I'd sure like to see this anchor digging in better and really stopping all this motion. So I'm gonna retest the anchor again here in sort of a quote deep set manner. I'm not gonna do any reversing. And that maybe that'll tell us a little bit more about this anchor's holding power. We don't see it, but here's the 10th reset. We can infer by all this motion that we can hear that it didn't engage terribly well. Starting to see it. Yeah, we're moving along. No real difference in power, just kind of slightly above idle. So here's the retrieval. Got some weeds, and of course the camera tether's wrapped around one of the ears there, and there's some mud. So I think this anchor does tend to foul. It works much better on the initial set, and then as you drag it around, it seems to collect stuff. I want to point out something here. See how the anchor is free falling? Go back and watch. Every single time it does the same thing. The anchor kind of flies kind of over the chain. It does the exact same thing. And then additionally, this is interesting, the chain has just slightly caught under the bolt that bolts the hoop. This takes care of itself. I don't think it's a big deal, but that was interesting. A little bit of a chain fouling on that bolt. So with a nice, fresh, clean anchor, I've reset at 5-to-1 scope. And this time, I'm not going to do any messing around with resets. I'm just going to pull in one direction and see how hard I can pull, and maybe we can get an idea of its ability to dive into the seabed and generate a lot of holding power. So far, it's great. I've got a little bit of power on. Not moving at all. There's a little bit more power. I wish I could even guess what the thrust is, but it's, maybe a couple hundred pounds. That's all I can say. It does appear that the anchor is diving. I'm seeing less of the roll bar. Near as I can tell, the roll bar has now just about met the surface. And now I think the roll bar is descending below the level of the substrate. That's wonderful. I wish it would have done that on all those resets. I add a little bit more power. Now I'm up topside. I don't have any idea what's going on, and I've actually got another camera going, and I'm going to show. It's kind of funny, but what happens, unfortunately, is the anchor lets go, and the boat runs forward rather violently. Now I haven't cut the power. I'm not even at the helm up there. The boat's just going to drive in itself forward. So once it caught in, the boat kind of abruptly stopped, which again is comical. Well, I'll show you that footage here in a minute, what happened up above. But unfortunately, it didn't really re-engage, so I think now the anchor's got some fouling, and it's just not as good as when it was clean. And I chopped the power and discontinue this test. So here's that footage. So right now, I'm kind of near the back of the boat, no one's at the helm, and the anchor lets go, and that's me. I didn't almost fall in, but it sure surprised me. And then when it hooked up again, I'm lurching forward, so I kind of learned a lesson there. I kind of need to stay closer to the helm when this is going on. Anyway, it's about 2,000 RPM, and maybe someone who's more familiar with these motors can tell us maybe how much thrust that might have been. Maybe at 400 or 500 pounds. So here's on the retrieval. We did get a little bit of footage of one of these friendly Dungeness crabs. Maybe I should say he's not friendly, he's hungry. And he's actually testing that anchor for palatability. He thinks that might be something to eat. And here I'm starting to pull it up, and he's actually kind of almost chasing it a little bit. Not a lot of mud on it. Maybe it had a bunch of mud and maybe it sloughed off, but I gotta say, the anchor is susceptible to fouling. So here we are. I've gone over to my sand and gravel site. It's just a few miles away, and it's reliably free of mud and other binders. So it's just sand and gravel. 5-to-1 scope. I won't do all 10 back and forth. There's current here, and it's a little bit windy at this location, and there's some waves, so I don't give it the full 10 times back and forth, but we get the idea here with a few trips. Initial set's great. Nice and clear over here. Always get the best pictures at this site. I don't do any of the straight line maximum pull testing here. I'm just testing setting. That initial set's just grand. First reset mostly pivoted. I guess we'll call that a disengagement. And a rather quick re-engagement. You can see the current here is moving along, not real fast. It's kind of between tides. This is kind of interesting. Look, just see that rock that the chain just nudged? Anchor was upside down. It actually picked up that rock. That rock was attached to a piece of seaweed, and look at that. The seaweed's got its roots attached to the rock, and the anchor is, well, I guess this is now a 20-pound Mantus anchor because it picked up a rock. But in any event, it's digging in nice. The roll bar is getting mostly buried. Flipped over backwards, immediately rolls upright, and now it's having trouble. I realize it's not resetting by this point, but just in the name of science, I just kept going and going. Probably a little excessive to keep doing that, but what the heck. And this will be the last reset for this test site. Kind of more of the same. It's becoming abundantly clear that the anchor is fouled in some way. For those that didn't see the testing of the larger version of this anchor, everything I did with it was perfect. It was a 45-pound Mantus, and I could not make that anchor move more than a few feet from its initial landing spot. I used my big boat, and I jerked the living crap out of it, and it just glued to the bottom. So I don't want to fault the setting ability of this design, but I think I might be willing to say that I'm ready to fault just small anchors. And I'd love dearly to get my hands on 10 or 15-pound versions of some other top-performing anchors, and that might really make it conclusive. If I could get my hands on a small Spade or a small Sarka XL, but that might really tell us something. So this anchor is fouled with a lot of weed. That rock that we picked up as a hitchhiker, it's not present. That fell away, but does have a lot of weed. I don't know if that roll bar helped collect this or helped keep it. It's possible. That's why I'd really like to get a similar sized Spade or XL anchor, and maybe not having a roll bar would help that. I don't know. So we'll wrap things up with some still shots. I'd like to point out that it's possible that the bolts shown there at the base of the shank, those might be contributing to collecting or holding mud. This is not my anchor, so I'm not about to remove the bolts and weld that shank to the fluke. I think some folks may point out that my use of a mixed rode and not an all-chain rode might have contributed to some of these less than perfect performances, but I'm going to choose not to do that. I think that this size of anchor would almost always be used with a mixed rode, so that's the way I'm going to keep testing it. Okay, that's all I got for now. Till next time, so long.